What if the very blood that made you royalty also guaranteed your destruction? Behind glittering palace walls, royal children struggled for breath while their parents obsessed over bloodline purity. For centuries, the pursuit of power through pure blood carved weakness into the flesh of kings and queens. This is the hidden tragedy, where crowns became curses. Medieval marriage was survival, not love. Blood was currency. The closer that blood, the stronger the bond, at least in theory. In gilded halls, where power was traded like silk, Eleanor of Castile's marriage to Edward I in the 1300s was celebrated as both romance and strategy. Nobles whispered of divine blessing while calculating territorial gains. The bride's bloodline shared ancestry with England's most powerful houses, making her both queen and cousin to those who crowned her. Across Europe, the Habsburg dynasty was already weaving branches of the same tree back into themselves. Cousin marriages were praised as acts of loyalty, not danger. Chroniclers wrote of continuity, of God's will guiding noble families to preserve their sacred bloodlines. But beneath golden ceremony, tremors stirred. Midwives delivered too many silent infants to marble cradles. Heirs grew frail, their bodies unable to bear the burden. The whispers were faint, silenced by priests eager to preserve divine illusion. Physicians spoke, in hushed tones, of mysterious ailments that seemed to follow bloodlines like shadows, claiming princes and princesses with disturbing regularity. The truth lingered in empty nurseries. Dynastic purity was beginning to exact its toll. A cousin's marriage meant a kingdom secured. An uncle's blessing meant borders held firm. The closer the kin, the tighter the knot. It seemed harmless at first, hidden beneath court glitter. But generation by generation, those tremors swelled until kingdom foundations began to shake. And as the centuries passed, the gamble grew deadlier. By the 17th century, Europe's courts had perfected the art of appearances. Palaces gleamed with marble and gold, while bloodlines cracked behind closed doors. The sickrooms of royal palaces stank of incense and holy oils, priests murmuring prayers over dying heirs while masking the rot beneath perfumed linens. Madrid rang with church bells when Isabella II was born in 1830, crowds filling cobblestone squares to cheer their future queen. Beneath the celebration lay unease. Court physicians exchanged worried glances as they examined the newborn princess. She was no ordinary royal child. Her bloodline was already a web of repetition, her ancestry folded back upon itself like a twisted rope. Child of uncle and niece, Isabella carried the accumulated weight of generations who had married too close. Her grandparents on one side were also her great-grandparents on the other, creating a genetic labyrinth that left courtiers privately counting the dangerous connections. At 16, Isabella married her double second cousin in a ceremony that filled Madrid's royal palace with foreign dignitaries. The wedding was magnificent, attended by Europe's nobility. The bloodline was catastrophic. 11 children followed over the years, yet only 5 survived their first birthdays. Spanish nobles whispered behind fans and in shadowed alcoves that none of those surviving heirs were fathered by her husband at all, adding layers of scandal to genetic tragedy. When revolution finally came, Isabella's reign ended in exile. Her dynasty's promise dissolved into uncertainty. Far to the west, Lisbon's palace echoed with screams through the night. Maria I of Portugal, once called the pious for her devotion, had become the mad, as her mind unraveled in spectacular fashion. Courtiers described her wandering palace corridors at midnight, weeping and calling for dead children, her cries carrying through marble halls until dawn. She was the 16th Iberian royal, produced by relentless close intermarriage, her parents themselves, cousins within a dynasty already tangled for centuries. Under crushing pressure to preserve tradition and secure succession, Maria had sealed her fate by marrying her own uncle in a ceremony blessed by Lisbon's highest clergy. Half her children died young, their tiny coffins carried from the palace, while Maria's grief deepened into madness. As grief consumed her, courtiers whispered prayers and warnings. The queen, who once ruled with pious devotion, became a specter haunting her own throne rooms, declared unfit to rule by the very nobles who had once praised her pure bloodline. But Spain and Portugal's tragedies were only shadows of what was unfolding at the heart of Europe's most powerful dynasty. The Habsburg dynasty commanded territories so vast that the sun never set on their empire. From Spain's golden Americas to Austria's alpine forests, from the Low Countries' merchant cities to the New World's silver mines, their courts glittered with treasures from 4 continents. Their portraits displayed confidence that seemed unshakable. Ambassador reports praised their magnificence while privately documenting something far more troubling. Foreign envoys wrote home in barely concealed horror about Charles II of Spain, born in 1661, into the most powerful family on earth. The king, who commanded the largest empire in human history, could barely speak intelligible words, could barely stand without support, yet somehow ruled over armies, treasure fleets, and territories spanning continents. Child of uncle and niece Philip IV and Mariana of Austria, Charles's ancestry had become so tangled that genealogists calculated he possessed fewer unique ancestors than a common peasant child. His family tree, once the pride of European nobility, had become a looping knot instead of a branching oak. Venetian ambassador Sebastiano Foscarini described Charles as short, lame, epileptic, senile, and completely bald before 35. Courtiers developed elaborate protocols to hide his infirmities from visiting dignitaries. His misshapen jaw, known as the Habsburg jaw, had grown so pronounced that his teeth could not meet, forcing servants to pre-chew his food like feeding an infant prince. His swollen tongue filled his mouth completely, turning royal proclamations into slurred sounds that courtiers pretended to understand with solemn nods. Frequent seizures sent the King of Spain collapsing to marble floors, while horrified nobles averted their eyes and pretended such incidents were divine tests. Palace physicians filled their reports with references to mysterious ailments while avoiding the obvious truth. Whispers of witchcraft filled corridors as desperate courtiers sought explanations. Exorcists were summoned from across Catholic Europe, prayers offered at every shrine, holy relics brought to his bedside in increasingly frantic attempts to cure their king. But the truth was simpler and crueler than any supernatural curse. 3 centuries of Habsburg obsession with bloodline purity had made their final king a prisoner in his own broken body. What is a crown worth if it costs the life of every heir who might wear it? Charles was married twice, first to French Princess Marie-Louise d'Orléans, then to German Princess Maria Anna of Neuburg. Both queens were young, healthy, and desperate to provide Spain with an heir. Both unions remained childless, despite decades of marriage and countless prayers. When Charles died in 1700, the Spanish Habsburg line died with him, plunging Europe into the War of Spanish Succession that would reshape the continent's balance of power. The most powerful dynasty in human history had collapsed under the weight of its own blood. Centuries passed, empires fell, yet the dangers of inbreeding didn't vanish. They resurfaced in the most unexpected corners of the modern world. In 2004, photographer Mark Laita ventured into West Virginia's Forgotten Hills on assignment and encountered something that would haunt him for years. The Whitaker family lived in isolation so complete that generations had turned inward. Cousins marrying cousins in cycles that had continued for over a century. When Laita's camera first captured them, the silence was more unsettling than any scream. They communicated primarily in grunts and hand gestures, their speech barely recognizable as human language. Severe physical deformities marked every family member: misshapen heads, vacant stares, limbs that didn't quite work properly. Later, Laita would describe the experience as the most disturbing photo shoot of his career, admitting he had nightmares about the encounter. Local residents in the holler had whispered about that family up the ridge for decades, crossing themselves when the Whitaker name was mentioned, warning outsiders to stay away. Few had ever witnessed the reality behind closed doors. When Laita's photographs and videos surfaced online, viewers worldwide reacted with shock and horror. Comment sections filled with disbelief. Surely this couldn't be real, couldn't happen in modern America. But genetic testing would later confirm what was obvious to any observer. Generations of inbreeding had created devastating consequences, identical to those that plagued Europe's royal families. Unlike Europe's monarchs, who chose inbreeding to preserve power and legitimacy, the Whitakers were trapped by poverty, geographic isolation, and lack of education. Yet the genetic devastation was identical. Biology recognizes no crowns. Thousands of miles away, Australian authorities in 2012 uncovered what newspapers dubbed the Kimberley family case, a discovery that would dominate headlines and shock the nation. Police investigators, following reports of suspected child neglect, discovered a remote farmhouse in rural New South Wales, where 4 generations had interbred in patterns that defied comprehension. The first officers on scene described children with faces blank of expression, eyes that didn't track movement, minds that couldn't process simple instructions. Teenagers crawled on hands and knees instead of walking. Adults who had never learned to read or write communicated in sounds rather than words. The silence of the compound was broken only by confused moans and the shuffling of feet across bare floors. Medical examinations revealed genetic damage so extensive that many children faced lifetimes of institutional care. Australian media covered the story extensively, with headlines like "House of Horrors" and "Genetic Nightmare." Parliament members called for investigations into how such isolation could exist undetected. Child Services removed dozens of victims, many of whom had never seen the outside world beyond their family's property. The case sparked national debates about rural isolation, government oversight, and the responsibility of communities to protect vulnerable children. Yet beneath the outrage lay the same biological truth that had destroyed Egyptian pharaohs and Spanish kings. Power and poverty, marble palaces and wooden shacks, different worlds governed by identical arithmetic. When bloodlines fold too tightly, they break. But the truth is older still. Long before Europe's thrones crumbled, long before America was even discovered, another empire tested this gamble on the grandest scale and called it divine will. In the shadow of pyramids that still pierce Egypt's desert sky, where pharaohs ruled as living gods for over 3,000 years, brother-sister, marriage wasn't whispered scandal, it was sacred duty, proclaimed from temple steps. High priests declared that divine blood must remain pure, that mixing with mortal bloodlines would anger the gods and bring chaos to the two lands. Temple walls still display carved scenes of royal siblings embracing as spouses, their union blessed by gods whose own myths celebrated similar relationships. For 30 dynasties, Egyptian rulers embraced what other civilizations forbade. Tutankhamun's mummy tells the story most clearly in broken bones and twisted limbs. Son of the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten, and most likely his own sister, the boy king's body revealed the full toll of this divine experiment. His fragile bones cracked under their own weight, requiring constant support. Cleft palate, clubfoot, curved spine deformities hidden beneath golden burial masks that projected eternal power. Over 130 walking sticks were found carefully arranged in his tomb. A pharaoh who could barely stand unaided, yet was buried with the symbols of striding confidently into the afterlife. His mummified body showed evidence of multiple bone fractures that never healed properly. A king whose divine status couldn't protect him from the consequences of genetics. In his tomb lay perhaps the most heartbreaking evidence of all: 2 tiny mummified daughters, carefully wrapped and placed in miniature sarcophagi. Both were stillborn, their small bodies showing the same deformities that marked their father's bloodline. Medical examinations revealed spina bifida and other genetic conditions that had made life impossible. Their mother, Queen Ankhesenamun, was not only Tutankhamun's wife but his half-sister, the daughter of the same pharaoh who had fathered her husband. Even gods, it seemed, could not escape the laws of biology. The Ptolemies, descendants of Alexander the Great's general who claimed Egypt after the conqueror's death, pushed this experiment to its absolute limit. For nearly 3 centuries, these Macedonian Greeks ruled the richest kingdom on earth through deliberate inbreeding that made European royal families seem cautious by comparison. Brother married sister so routinely that genealogists gave up trying to create traditional family trees. The relationships formed circles instead of branches. Cleopatra II embodied this obsession perfectly. Child of siblings, she was married twice within her own family to brothers whose mental instability matched their genetic damage. Civil wars erupted regularly, as damaged minds wielded absolute power over the Mediterranean's greatest treasure house. Brothers murdered sisters, sisters poisoned brothers, and the dynasty that had once brought stability to Egypt descended into cycles of violence that left Alexandria's streets running with blood. The queen who ruled the richest kingdom on earth lived as a prisoner of her own poisoned lineage, her reign marked by betrayals, assassinations, and the slow genetic collapse of a family that had forgotten how to produce healthy heirs. How many generations can a bloodline turn inward before it destroys itself completely? The same blood that crowned them also destroyed them.